It's time for our first look at a Chinese track in this series. Yes, it has taken a while to get to this point, but here we are with what is perhaps the most forgotten of all the Chinese street tracks to have ever existed. This track used by Formula E in 2019 was located in the city of Sanya, although these aerial shots do make it look as though it's a large theme park near the ocean, just with a bridge and a skyscraper in the foreground. Certainly not like the other Chinese tracks that will feature later on in this series. Now, whilst the track was based in Sanya, the name of the track was called the Heitang Bay Circuit, and it was quite a short circuit as well, just under 1.4 miles / just over 2.2 kilometers in length. And it would have 11 corners, with 7 heading in the left direction and 4 heading to the right direction. Normally I would leave the reason for why an event didn't last very long at the end of the video. However, I'm going to say it now as, well, I think we're all aware of what global event around the world caused a number of motor races and sporting events to be cancelled, and Sanya was one of them. There has been attempts to bring this track back to the schedule, but has never materialised. And whilst it could conceivably return, the rumours from what I've read seem to indicate that a return to Sanya is unlikely at this point. And with that, it's time to go over the circuit itself. After you go across the start line, but not the finish line, although we'll come on to that later, the first challenge to overcome is a 90-degree corner. Oh, please, not again. But wait, don't worry, that doesn't explain the whole story. You see, whilst in principle the first corner is a 90-degree left-hander, the second corner comes at you so fast that actually, turns 1 and 2 could in theory become one whole corner, with 2 apexes, with the second corner being quite tight on the entry, before opening up on the exit to give the driver the ability to go flat out. Also, whilst we're here, this seemed like a great spectator section, with a massive grandstand, ginormous television, along with being able to see the pit lane exit, 2 whole corners, and the entry to another at turn 3. If you sat at that section, I'd imagine you'd have gotten your money's worth. It's then on to turn 3, where you head under a covered bridge on a corner which is just about on the borderline of not being a 90-degree corner. Turn 4 is quite a cool hairpin, as hairpins go, with it being quite open in radius, yet narrow in width, along with being quite bumpy as well. However, a bit like the rest of the track's bend so far, it's far from an ideal overtaking zone. The narrowness continues on this track as you head towards turn 5, which is also a hairpin, but sadly I can't be quite so approving of this one. Turn 5 is significantly tighter in radius, but its tightness means that despite the heavy braking zone, this too doesn't really have all the hallmarks of being a particularly good overtaking zone either. The exit of this corner utilises what in essence is an entry ramp onto a bridge, but if cars were side by side here, a pinch point could have been created. It's on to the first of 2 very long straights, hardly surprising given they're utilising a bridge. Turn 7 does exist with this gentle left-hander, but it's one that the drivers basically ignore, before it's on to the tightest hairpin on the track, a hairpin that basically brings you onto the other side of the bridge. This is definitely the best place for an overtake to be done on this track, a heavy braking zone, one of the rare sections with decent width to fit a couple of cars side by side, so an ideal spot to attempt to move, or make contact with a rival. Turn 9 is a non-existent right-hander where you are then greeted by the start line, which was probably the sensible place to locate it from a chaos avoidance perspective. I mean, it would have been interesting to see 22 Formula E cars charge down to turn 1 at this track. On the whole though, turn 10 is quite an interesting corner. There's little room for error with the outside wall being very close to you, but you could take a decent amount of speed into this corner as it opened up on the exit. Sadly, this bend too is not a likely place for an overtake to be pulled off. Seemingly track position was key on this circuit. Then it's on to the final corner at turn 11, which is a 90-degree left-hander. However, to be honest, the corner type isn't the thing that bothers me the most. No, that would be the corner profile, which was made a fair bit tighter than what it could have been. I have to imagine there was a reason for this, because surely this wall could have been pushed back a bit, and this strange curb extension could have been removed or at least made smaller, because instead of a normal 90-degree corner that could have become a potential overtaking area, it's now a clunky, cumbersome 90-degree corner which is so narrow that fitting 2 cars side by side through there would be nearly impossible, unless the drivers were exceptionally respectful of each other, and I'm fairly confident that that's not what goes through their minds all that often whilst in the cockpit. Although I must say that is quite a cool bridge over that corner. Also, whilst we're here, we might as well look at the pit lane entrance, which does look somewhat awkward to navigate. Not the worst pit entrance I've ever seen, but certainly not great. Although this is perhaps due to the lack of space they had to utilise. If you see this piece of tarmac and wondering where it goes, well, that's the turn 4 hairpin. So, as you can perhaps tell, they were somewhat restricted by what they could do here, which is where the compromise of a narrow pit lane comes in. And just like that, you've completed a lap of the Haitang Bay circuit. A lap which, honestly, just isn't all that spectacular. It's got some okay corners and a few okay areas to attempt an overtake on, but really this is just not a particularly invigorating circuit. There's nothing that gets me amazingly excited about this track. Also, realistically, the only viewing areas that could be used was in the first sector of the lap. Once you left the, I guess you would say, hospitality area sort of thing, the grandstands were gone. And a bit like a few episodes ago in Singen, I just can't figure out how a festival-like atmosphere could be created by this track, outside of the first sector. It only adds to this unspectacular feeling when you analyse this track/event. Again, just like Singen though, I'd love to be proven wrong, so if on the off chance any of you did go to this event, I'm intrigued to know what it was like. So say your thoughts in the comment section down below, along with any other street tracks you'd like to see featured in this series. However, that is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and until the next video, be kind to each other and enjoy the rest of your day.